The ex-husband and his new girlfriend went to a party and unexpectedly ran into his stunning ex-wife. The Fitzgerald mansion sparkled like a jewel under the starry sky. It was the most anticipated party of the year, a gathering where the most influential names in the city came together to exchange fake smiles and secrets masked by expensive champagne. Richard got out of the sports car, accompanied by Caroline, whose presence was impossible to ignore. She emanated an almost calculated magnetism, dressed in a long red dress with strategic slits. She seemed intent on ensuring that everyone knew of her position at Richard's side. "You look perfect," he murmured, adjusting his jacket. "Remember, we're the most important couple here." But there was tension in his voice. Caroline noticed it, although she didn't mention it. As they walked through the main doors, the atmosphere enveloped them with the soft sound of a string quartet and the buzz of animated conversations. Richard greeted acquaintances, showing off his charm. Everything seemed perfect until he saw her, Evelyn. She was standing by the fireplace, a quiet smile on her lips, with a glass of wine in her hand. She was wearing a classic black dress, but something about her posture made it seem as if she dominated the room. Her hair was tied up in an elegant bun, revealing delicate earrings that sparkled like constellations. It was impossible to ignore her. Richard's gaze wavered for a moment. He felt a twinge of something he didn't want to name: guilt, nostalgia, or perhaps regret. Caroline followed his gaze and saw Evelyn. Her face hardened. "Who is she?" Caroline asked, even though she already knew. "My ex-wife," he replied, his voice low. "She doesn't seem shaken by seeing you," Caroline commented with a note of sarcasm. In fact, Evelyn seemed completely at ease. She was talking to a small group of people who were laughing at something she said. When her eyes finally met Richard's, she raised her glass slightly in a discreet greeting. The gesture was small, but it carried immense weight. "Richard!" a male voice called out, snapping him out of his trance. It was Gregory, an old friend who was running the event. "Come and meet some investors. Have you brought some good company?" Caroline smiled, but her attention remained fixed on Evelyn. "Of course, Gregory." "Caroline's my girlfriend," Richard said quickly, introducing her as they were pulled into a group of conversations. Richard could hardly focus. His mind oscillated between Evelyn's presence and Caroline's hardened expression. When he finally managed to pull away a little, Caroline tugged him by the arm. "You look uncomfortable," she said with a softness that carried a tone of accusation. "It's not that," he replied, but his eyes kept searching the room for Evelyn. Shortly afterwards, the inevitable happened. Evelyn walked up to them with the same calm she had shown all evening. "Richard," she said with a tone that was both cordial and distant, "what a surprise." "Evelyn," he replied, forcing a smile, "I didn't know you'd be here." "Fitzgerald is an old friend," she replied, glancing at Caroline. "And who's this?" Caroline stepped forward, holding out her hand. "Caroline, Richard's girlfriend." Evelyn greeted her with a soft smile, but her eyes were as sharp as blades. "It's a pleasure to meet you." The conversation was brief, but each word seemed to carry an implied weight. When Evelyn walked away, Caroline turned to Richard. "She's stunning," Caroline said, without hiding the venom in her voice. "And she still seems to exert a certain fascination over you." "Don't be ridiculous," he replied, but avoided looking her in the eye. At the other end of the hall, Evelyn watched from afar. Her smile remained intact, but there was a glint in her eyes, a mixture of satisfaction and melancholy. As the guests danced and conversation flowed, Richard realized that, try as he might, he couldn't ignore Evelyn's presence. Across the room she seemed to be in complete control, radiating a confidence he had never seen before. He wasn't sure what that meant, but something inside him told him that the evening would not end as he had planned. The evening went on like a well-rehearsed play, but Richard felt the tension growing with every moment. Evelyn seemed to radiate a presence that unsettled him. As Caroline walked away to get a drink, He watched his ex-wife chatting with a small group of people. She seemed more confident, more alive, completely different from the woman he had left behind. Evelyn was no longer the insecure shadow who spent hours waiting for him on long nights at meetings, nor the woman who begged for his attention while he ignored her. Now she was a symbol of strength, something he no longer recognized. Meanwhile, Caroline, increasingly suspicious, returned with 2 glasses of champagne and sat down next to him. "You've been acting strange ever since you saw her," she commented bluntly. "Be honest with me, Richard. What happened between you?" He tried to ignore it, but Caroline's gaze wouldn't budge. "It's nothing," he said, but his words sounded empty. Richard and Evelyn's marriage was a perfect union on paper. He was an ambitious, charismatic businessman, always surrounded by influential people. She, on the other hand, was sweet, loyal, a talented writer who put her dreams on the back burner to support him. In the beginning there was love, passion, even companionship. But over time, Richard's ambition consumed everything. Evelyn accompanied him to events and parties, but soon realized that she was just a decorative piece in his life. He never really saw her, not her efforts, not her sacrifices, not her pain. "You knew I had dreams too," she once said in the middle of a heated argument. "I wanted to publish my books. I wanted something besides being Richard Monroe's wife." "That again, Evelyn?" he replied, exasperated. "I work hard to give us this life. Everything you have comes from me. You should be grateful." His words left their mark on her. He didn't see her pain, her lonely nights while he was away working. Evelyn learned eventually that they weren't just business meetings. The betrayals started out discreetly, but soon became impossible to ignore. She confronted him once, holding back tears. "You're with someone else, aren't you?" He didn't deny it. Instead, he shrugged. "You make too much of a drama, Evelyn. Maybe if you were more like them, confident, fun, things would be different." That was the last break between them. Evelyn, devastated, gathered what was left of her dignity and left. It wasn't easy, but the divorce gave her the freedom she never had. She rebuilt her life, rediscovered her passion for writing, and did what Richard never imagined. She blossomed. At the party, as Evelyn casually crossed the room, Richard couldn't help the memories that haunted him. He tried to convince himself that there were no regrets, but something in the way she looked at him, with a mixture of contempt and indifference, made his confidence tremble. Caroline, standing next to him, noticed his distraction. "She left you, didn't she?" she asked, her voice cold. "I left her," he replied bitterly, "but not before she became unbearable, always complaining, always expecting more from me." Caroline arched an eyebrow. Maybe she just wanted to be appreciated. Richard didn't reply. Instead, he took a long sip of champagne, trying to stifle the growing feeling that he wasn't as innocent as he wanted to believe. While the couple argued in a discreet corner, Evelyn was the center of attention. A famous publisher, attracted by her literary talent, was talking about the success of her latest book. "You've really captured the essence of love and loss, Evelyn. It's a brilliant piece of work." "Thank you," she replied with a serene smile. "Pain, when transformed into art, can be liberating." Those words hit Richard like a punch. He knew the book was about their marriage. Every line carried the flaws he tried to sweep under the carpet. Caroline noticed Richard's discomfort and stared at him. "She wrote about you, didn't she?" "Maybe, or maybe not. I don't know. I've never read anything she's written," he admitted with a forced smile. "Well, it looks like she's moved on," Caroline replied, full of venom. "You should do the same." As Richard struggled with his inner turmoil, Evelyn walked towards him with a determined look on her face. He felt the weight of inevitability. They needed to talk, and he knew it would be painful. When she stopped a few steps from him, the room seemed to freeze in time. "Richard, it's been so long since I've seen you. I can't even remember the last time we spoke," she began, her tone low but sharp as a blade. "I think it's time we had a chat." Her posture was upright and confident. He tried to pull himself together, straightening his tie, but his expression of discomfort was obvious. Caroline stood beside him, silent, but her eyes were fixed on Evelyn, studying her every move. "Evelyn," he said in a voice that was meant to sound casual but came out tense, "is it really necessary for us to talk here?" "I'd say so," she replied, her voice low and controlled. "It's hard to find you anywhere else, since you always seem to be busy." Richard frowned, but before he could reply, Evelyn crossed her arms and continued, "I would have thought that after all this time you would have changed, but it seems the priority is still to parade around with flawless girlfriends and keep up appearances, isn't it?" She glared at Caroline, who stiffened but kept her composure. "Evelyn, this is neither the time nor the place," Richard replied, his tone laced with irritation. "Ah, but when would that be?" Evelyn retorted, arching an eyebrow. "While you're here impressing strangers, your daughter, our daughter, is at home wondering why her father never calls. But of course, sending money every month should be enough, shouldn't it? After all, it's always easier for you to buy affection than to show it." Richard felt his throat go dry as Caroline looked away from him, clearly uncomfortable. "That's not fair, Evelyn," he said defensively. "I do what I can, and I work hard to offer her what I can." "You do what you can?" Evelyn let out a bitter laugh. "Richard, what Emma needs isn't a bank deposit. She needs a father, one who knows who her friends are, what she likes to eat, what fear makes her wake up in the middle of the night. Do you know she's taking part in a science project?" "Of course not. You're more worried about your next car or the next party where you can show off your latest conquest." Caroline swallowed, her expression rigid. Evelyn turned to her, her eyes shining with a combination of sarcasm and compassion. "Caroline, I hope you'll be patient. If you two are going to go far, you're going to need it. Because the constant outings, the vague excuses and the messages he never answers become unbearable after a while." "Enough, Evelyn," Richard interrupted, his voice louder than he had intended. A few people nearby glanced in his direction, but then went back to their conversations, pretending not to hear. "You don't have to put on a show here." "I'm not putting on a show, Richard," Evelyn replied, tilting her head slightly. "I'm just reminding you that some responsibilities don't disappear just because you ignore them. Good luck, Caroline, really." Evelyn took a step back, still calm and composed, while Richard was visibly shaken. She smiled briefly but without warmth and moved away to another corner of the room, where she was greeted by a group of people who seemed happy to see her. Caroline looked at Richard, her expression harder than before. "Is she right?" "She's overreacting," he grumbled, taking a glass of champagne from a passing tray. "You know how these women are after the wedding is over. Always dramatic." But Caroline didn't look convinced. She remained silent, watching as Richard downed the champagne in a single gulp. Throughout the evening, Richard couldn't help looking at Evelyn. She was surrounded by people who seemed to genuinely admire her. The editor who had talked to her earlier reappeared, along with a well-known actress who praised her literary work. Evelyn smiled, responding modestly, but there was something in her gaze that made it clear she knew the impact she was making. Every laugh, every compliment, made Richard sink deeper into his anger and discomfort. He took another glass of champagne, then another, and then moved on to the whiskey. Caroline watched him, increasingly frustrated. "You seem obsessed with her," Caroline finally said. "Don't be ridiculous," he replied, but his tone was laced with irritation. "You don't understand, Evelyn. She always knew how to manipulate people." "Or maybe you just never knew how to appreciate her," Caroline retorted, turning away before he could reply. Richard continued to drink, now unable to hide the resentment growing inside him. He watched as Evelyn was the center of attention, shining in a way he had never allowed her to before. As the evening drew to a close, Richard was leaning in a corner, an empty glass in hand, his eyes fixed on Evelyn. He didn't know if it was the drink or the weight of his choices, but he felt as if the party was a cruel metaphor for his own life, a spectacle where he was just a supporting player in Evelyn's story. Evelyn looked in his direction one last time before leaving. For a brief moment he saw something in her eyes, not anger, but something even more painful, indifference, and it destroyed him. The drive home was silent. Caroline was sitting in the passenger seat, her arms crossed and her gaze fixed on the window. Richard, still under the influence of the drink and the disastrous night, lay in the back seat without saying a word. He knew that something needed to be said, but he couldn't find the right words. Or perhaps he didn't have the courage to face the truth. As soon as the driver parked the car at Richard's luxurious apartment, Caroline got out of the car without waiting for him. Inside the house, she finally broke the silence. "So that's it?" she snapped, her voice laced with frustration. "Are you going to pretend that scene at the party didn't happen?" Richard closed the door, sighing. "It's not that simple, Caroline. Evelyn always knew how to make an impact." "Impact?" Caroline shouted. "She did nothing but tell the truth. And you know what's worse, Richard? I can't even discuss it with you because deep down I think she's right." "She overreacted," he replied, trying to sound convincing, but his voice failed him. Caroline crossed her arms, staring at him intensely. "You don't even know your own daughter very well, Richard. All this time we've been together, you've never brought your daughter here. How old is she, anyway? What's her best friend's name? You don't know, do you?" Richard ran a hand over his face, exasperated. "Caroline, I do what I can. I work hard to maintain all this, the house, the lifestyle. Isn't that enough?" "No, it's not," she retorted. "And you know what's worse? You're still stuck in the past, stuck on Evelyn. Your behavior at the party was ridiculous. You drank and stared at her the whole time." "That's not true," he lied, but Caroline saw right through him. She shook her head in disappointment. "I should have known before. Are you going to say that you didn't spend the whole night looking at her? You didn't even try to hide it or disguise it?" "You're exaggerating," he replied, but his words sounded empty. Caroline hesitated for a moment, taking a deep breath. "Tell me, Richard, what are we? A game to you? Or am I just next in line waiting for you to tire me out?" "Caroline, this has nothing to do with you or her," he began, but his mind was muddled. And then, in the heat of the moment, he made the worst possible mistake. "Evelyn, please, you have to understand." The name slipped out before he could stop himself. The silence that followed was deafening. "You called me Evelyn?" Caroline asked, her voice low but charged with anger and disbelief. "Caroline, it was a mistake. I'm not well. I drank too much," he said quickly, but it was too late. "A mistake?" she repeated, laughing humorlessly. "No, the mistake was that I thought you cared about someone other than yourself." She picked up her bag and walked towards the door. Richard tried to stop her, but she held up her hand. "Don't follow me. Stay with your ghosts, Richard." And with that, she left, slamming the door behind her. Richard woke up the next morning with a throbbing head, more from embarrassment than a hangover. The memory of the argument with Caroline was eating away at him, but there was something even deeper bothering him. Evelyn's words. He picked up the phone and called his secretary. "Cancel everything today," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'm not going into the office." "Understood, Mr. Munro," she replied, but he hung up before she could hear any more. Richard spent the rest of the morning wandering around the apartment, unable to concentrate. Finally, feeling restless, he decided to go out. He went to the mall without knowing exactly what he was looking for, but as he passed a bookstore, he saw something that paralyzed him. In the window, there was a display of Evelyn's books. The most prominent title was her latest bestseller, Wings of Glass, with a photo of her on the back cover. She looked beautiful and confident, but it was the synopsis that caught his attention. A heartfelt account of a love that broke under the weight of selfishness, betrayal, and disillusionment. A story of survival, resilience, and liberation. Richard went into the bookshop and bought all her books, ignoring the curious stares of the sales clerks. Back at the apartment, he threw himself on the sofa and started reading. Evelyn's talent was undeniable. The words flowed like music, full of emotion and truth. But what hit him hardest was the content. It was as if she had opened her heart and poured out all the pain he had caused. In the book that clearly talked about their marriage, Evelyn described the loneliness of waiting for a husband who never came back, the feeling of being invisible, of never being enough. She mentioned the betrayals, the empty excuses, the broken promises. Richard felt a lump in his throat as he read one passage in particular. "I often wondered if the problem was with me. Maybe I was too demanding. Maybe my love was suffocating. But deep down, I knew the truth. He never saw what I had to offer because he was too busy looking for something better, something he would never find." He closed the book, unable to continue for a moment. When he picked it up again, he found the parts about Emma, his daughter. Evelyn described Emma's tears when she asked why her father was never there, the forgotten birthdays, the time she sat at the window waiting for a car that never arrived. Richard felt the crushing weight of his neglect. He tried to justify it to himself. Work, the demands of life. But he knew they were excuses. He had failed Evelyn, and he was failing Emma. When he finished the book, Richard put it down on the sofa and put his hands to his face. He felt naked, exposed, as if Evelyn had held a mirror up to him and forced him to face the man he really was. For the first time in years, Richard Monroe felt something he had avoided at all costs: shame. He stood up, walking over to the window. Outside, the world went on as normal, but inside, something had changed. He knew he couldn't go on living as he had before. Evelyn had been right. Caroline was right. He needed to put things right, or at least try. And that started with his daughter. The next morning, Richard woke up early, determined to do something different. He felt exhausted, but for the first time in years, not from overwork or empty parties. It was the weight of his own conscience. He picked up the phone, hesitating before dialing Evelyn's number. The call went to voicemail. He tried again, but the result was the same. "Of course she won't pick up," he muttered to himself in frustration. With no alternative, he decided to send a message. "Evelyn, we need to talk. I know I failed as a father and as a husband. I want to change that, especially for Emma. Please give me a chance to make things right. Let me see her." He stared at the phone, waiting for an answer that didn't come. So he decided to go to the only place where he could feel useful: Emma's school. Richard arrived at the school in the middle of the afternoon, just as the children were rushing out of the gates. He looked around, trying to spot Emma. Finally, he saw her, a little girl with brown hair in pigtails, carrying a backpack that was bigger than her. She was accompanied by a friend, laughing about something they shared. Richard's heart squeezed. He hadn't seen her in person for months. She seemed bigger, more mature, as if time had slipped through his fingers. "Emma!" he called, walking over to her. The girl looked at him, confused for a moment. She didn't seem to recognize him. When she finally realized who it was, her smile disappeared, replaced by an expression of discomfort. "Hi, Dad," she said hesitantly. Richard stooped down to her height. "Can I give you a ride home? I wanted to spend some time with you." Emma looked at her friend, who shrugged, then down at the floor. "Mum's picking me up. She didn't know you were coming." "I know, it was last minute," he admitted, feeling embarrassed. "But I wanted to see you. Please." Before Emma could reply, Evelyn appeared. She wore a casual outfit, but her posture was firm, the expression on her face a mixture of surprise and caution. "Richard," she said without heat, "what are you doing here?" "I just wanted to see my daughter," he replied, trying to keep his composure. Evelyn crossed her arms, shielding Emma with her body. "Without warning? Without planning it? Do you really think that's how it works?" Richard took a deep breath. "I know I screwed up. I'm trying to fix it. Please, Evelyn, just let me spend some time with her." Evelyn hesitated, looking at Emma, who seemed uncomfortable with the situation. Finally she sighed. "All right, but half an hour, and only because Emma seems to want to listen to you." The two of them went to a nearby cafe. Emma sat on one side of the table, stirring her mug of hot chocolate without looking at Richard directly. He felt the distance between them like an invisible wall. "So how are you?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Fine," she replied without detail. "I heard about the science project you're doing at school," he said, remembering something Evelyn had mentioned the night of the event. "It sounds amazing." Emma glanced at him, surprised that he knew about it. "It's about the solar system. I made Saturn out of clay." Richard smiled. "Saturn is my favorite planet." "Is it?" she asked suspiciously. "Yes, the rings have always fascinated me. When I was your age, I did a project on it too." The conversation continued hesitantly, but little by little, Emma began to relax. Richard listened carefully to her every word, absorbing the details he had previously ignored. When the half hour was up, Evelyn appeared to pick her up. Emma looked at him before leaving. "Are you going to see me again?" "Yes," he replied firmly. "I promise." Evelyn looked at him, assessing whether the promise was sincere. "I hope you keep it." After Emma got into the car, Evelyn stood outside, crossing her arms. "You're trying now, but have you thought about all the time you've lost?" she asked, her tone calm, but full of resentment. "I've thought about it all these last few days," he admitted sincerely. "Evelyn, I've read your books, every word. I saw how much you suffered, and now I see how much Emma suffers. You have every right to hate me, but let me be part of her life, for real this time." Evelyn stared at him for a moment, looking for signs of genuine regret. "I don't hate you, Richard, but I don't trust you either. You'll need to prove that you mean what you say, not for me, but for Emma." He nodded, knowing that it would take more than words to win back his daughter. Back in the apartment, Richard looked at Evelyn's books stacked on the table. He knew that the changes would have to be profound, starting with himself. It wasn't enough to want to be a better father. He had to act. As he read yet another passage about their marriage, Richard realized that for the first time in years, he felt something close to humility. Evelyn and Emma deserved a different Richard, and he was determined to be that man. The next day, Richard parked his car in front of Emma's school 10 minutes early. He didn't want to risk being late, not after having agreed with Evelyn that he would pick up his daughter every day. It was a small commitment, but for him it felt like an important milestone, an attempt to make up for lost time. He watched the other parents, the casual conversations between them, and felt out of place. Everyone there seemed so integrated into their family's routines, while he was still a stranger in Emma's life. But when he finally saw her come out of the gates with her backpack swinging and her shy smile as she recognized him, something inside him warmed. "Hi, Dad," Emma said, running to the car. "Hi, Angel," he replied, opening the door for her. "How was school today?" Emma started talking animatedly about the day, about the science project, and how her teacher had praised her work. Richard listened carefully, letting his daughter's voice fill the emptiness he was carrying. It was a sound he didn't know he needed to hear so badly. On the way back to Evelyn's house, Emma, always so full of energy, started talking about something that took him by surprise. "Did you know Mom's dating?" she said casually. Richard almost slammed on the brakes but managed to keep his cool on the outside. He glanced at Emma, trying to disguise the twinge of jealousy he felt. "Oh, is that so?" he asked, trying to sound disinterested. "Yes, he's very nice," Emma continued, not noticing her father's discomfort. "His name is Victor. He takes us for walks in the park and bought me ice cream the other day. Oh, and we're going on a cruise next week. It's going to be so much fun." Richard swallowed, squeezing the steering wheel slightly. The idea of another man occupying a space in which he had failed so many times bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Evelyn with someone else was something he had never really considered, even though their marriage had ended years ago. "I'm glad he makes you happy," Richard managed to say with a forced smile. Emma nodded, not noticing the tone of false lightness in her father's voice. "He's fun. Mum seems happy too. She laughs more now." These words hit him like a blow. Evelyn was happy, happy without him, perhaps even happier than she had ever been by his side. He felt small, irrelevant, like he was just a shadow in her past. When they arrived at Evelyn's house, she was at the door waiting. Richard saw from afar the calm smile on her face as she greeted Emma and felt a mixture of emotions. Gratitude that she had raised such an incredible daughter and bitter jealousy that she had moved on. Evelyn approached the car, exchanging a few quick words with Richard about Emma's day. She seemed so serene, so sure of herself, that he couldn't help wondering how the woman he had known once, so submissive to his will, had become so independent, so unattainable. "Thanks for picking her up," Evelyn said with a small smile. "You're welcome. It's the least I can do," he replied, looking away. On the way home, Richard felt empty. Emma's words echoed in his mind. "He's very nice. Mum seems happy. Victor." The name felt like an intruder, a constant reminder of everything he had lost. When he arrived at the apartment, the silence seemed more deafening than ever. He opened a bottle of wine but stopped before pouring a glass. Drinking wouldn't solve anything, and he knew it. He sat down on the sofa, looking at Evelyn's books that were still on the table. He had read them all, as if they were a gateway to understanding her again. But now it seemed that she was further away than ever. In the middle of the night, his phone rang. It was Caroline. "Richard," she began, her voice hesitant. "Can we talk? I've been thinking about us." He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of guilt and regret. Caroline was an incredible woman, and he knew it, but he also knew that he couldn't give her what she deserved. Not now. "Caroline," he began, his voice low, "I don't know if this is a good idea. I just want to understand what happened," she said, her voice becoming firmer. "I thought we were fine, but then after that party, everything fell apart. You were so distant, and then you called me Evelyn." The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Richard took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "I'm sorry about what happened," he finally said, "but I think you deserve someone who isn't as confused as I am right now." "Confused or still stuck on her?" Caroline asked, the pain evident in her voice. Richard closed his eyes and remained silent, letting the silence answer for him. "I see," Caroline finally said with a resigned sigh. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Richard, and I hope it's worth it." Before he could reply, the call ended. He dropped the phone on the sofa beside him, feeling emptier than ever. He spent the rest of the evening staring at the ceiling, reliving every moment of the conversation with Emma, every word Evelyn had said. He knew he had to change. Not to win back Evelyn or impress Caroline, but for himself, and above all, for Emma. As the sun began to rise, Richard finally made up his mind. He didn't know what the road ahead would look like, but he was determined to be a better father. Perhaps he could never undo the past, but he could try to build a future that was worthwhile, and that, he knew, was all that mattered. Richard sat on the edge of the bed as the pale morning light streamed in through the half-open curtains. The bottle of wine he had ignored the night before was still on the table, untouched. Although he was exhausted, his mind was more active than ever. Evelyn was moving on. Emma had a potential other father, and he was stuck in a whirlpool of regret and self-loathing. He wasn't sure how long he stayed there, just staring at the ground. Finally, he decided to get up. He picked up his phone and started typing a message to Evelyn. He wanted to insist on seeing her, on talking, but every time he tried to type, he erased the words. He knew that anything he said would sound like an excuse. Evelyn deserves more. Emma deserves more. These words kept echoing in his mind as he grabbed a quick coffee and headed out for the day. He had no clear destination, but he needed to get out of the apartment. He needed to breathe. He drove through the city, passing places that unwittingly brought back memories of Evelyn and how he had destroyed something that at first was so beautiful. After a few hours, Richard found himself parked in front of a flower shop. He went in without knowing exactly why. He bought a bouquet of white lilies, Evelyn's favorite flowers, and as he walked back to his car, he had a flash of insight. It wasn't Evelyn who needed flowers, it was Emma. He arrived at school earlier than usual, bouquet in hand. As he waited, he felt the curious stares of other parents, but he didn't care. When Emma finally came out of the gates, her eyes widened at the sight of him holding the flowers. "For me?" she asked in surprise. "Of course," Richard replied with a smile. "You deserve all the flowers in the world." Emma took the bouquet, her shy smile warming Richard's heart. "They're so beautiful, Dad. Thank you." They walked to the car, and during the journey, Emma held the flowers as if they were the greatest gift she had ever received. As he drove her home, they talked about the day, her friends, and even her next science project. But then, while playing with the flower petals, Emma said something that froze Richard for an instant. "Victor gives flowers to Mom too. But you've never given her flowers before, have you?" Richard felt his stomach turn. He glanced quickly at his daughter through the rearview mirror, but Emma was still distracted by the bouquet, unaware of the impact of her words. "No, Emma, I don't think so," he admitted, his voice low. She shrugged as if it was no big deal. "I guess you're trying now, huh?" He tried to answer, but his voice wouldn't come out. She was right, he was trying now. But why had it taken so long? That evening when he got home, the phone rang again. For a moment, Richard thought it might be Evelyn, but when he saw Caroline's name on the screen, a weight settled on his chest. He thought about not answering, but knew that running away wouldn't solve anything. "Hi, Caroline," he said as he picked up. "Richard," she began, her tone calm but firm. "I've been thinking a lot about our last conversation, about how we ended. But I feel I need to tell you a few things before I move on." He leaned back on the sofa, preparing himself for what was coming next. "You didn't realize it, but I really tried to make things work between us," Caroline continued. "I ignored the signs, the moments when you seemed to be somewhere else, thinking about someone else. I thought that if I was patient, you would finally put the past behind you. But the truth is you never did, and I can't compete with that." "Caroline, I'm sorry," Richard began, but she interrupted him. "I know you are, but I feel you need to hear this. You're still stuck on Evelyn, on what happened between you. And maybe this isn't even about love. Maybe it's about regret, about what you didn't do for her and for your daughter." Richard remained silent, unable to argue. "I hope you'll sort it out," Caroline said, her voice softening. "Not for me, not for her, but for yourself. Because the way it is, you'll never be happy. And honestly, I deserve someone who's totally with me." "You do," he admitted, his voice full of sincerity. "Take care, Richard," she said before hanging up. He stared at the phone for a long time, feeling an emptiness that seemed to expand with every second. Over the next few days, Richard began to devote himself more to Emma. He picked her up and dropped her off at school, talked to her about her interests, and even helped with her science project and other subjects, something he would never have imagined doing before. But even as he strove to be a better father, the thought of Evelyn was still there. The thought of Victor, Emma's perfect boyfriend, ate away at him. He imagined what Victor was like, kind, considerate, everything he wasn't, and above all, someone who made Evelyn laugh again. On Thursday afternoon, while waiting for Emma at school, Richard decided he needed to talk to Evelyn. Not to try to win her back, but to open up, to be honest. He needed to tell her everything he had been holding back for so long. Evelyn was at home preparing her bags for the cruise when she heard the doorbell. When she opened the door, she was surprised to see Richard standing there with the most serious expression she had ever seen on him. "Richard," she said, crossing her arms, "what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice low. "It's important." Evelyn hesitated but opened the door, gesturing for him to come in. "We don't have much time. I'm packing to travel with Emma tomorrow," she said casually, but with a note of caution in her voice. "I know," Richard replied. "Emma told me about the cruise, and about Victor." Evelyn sighed, closing her eyes for a moment. "So that's what this is about?" "No, or maybe it is, in part," he admitted. "But what I mean goes beyond that." Evelyn waited, her arms still crossed. "I've read your books," he began, his voice breaking, "all of them, and for the first time I understood. I saw what you went through, how much I hurt you, and more than that, I saw how I failed Emma." Evelyn blinked in surprise but didn't reply. "I was selfish, Evelyn. I was so focused on my work, on my image, that I never really saw you. I never saw what you needed. I never saw Emma, and I'm sorry for everything." She remained silent, her expression neutral, but her eyes betrayed a glint of emotion. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he continued. "I just want you to know that I recognize what I've done and that I'm trying to change. For Emma, and maybe a little for myself." Evelyn finally sighed, uncrossing her arms. "I believe you're trying, Richard, and I hope you'll keep trying. For Emma, especially." Richard nodded, feeling a small sense of relief. "But as for me," she hesitated, choosing her words carefully, "I've moved on, and I think you should do the same. Not out of anger or resentment, but because sometimes people just don't belong together anymore." He swallowed, but nodded again. "I understand." Evelyn smiled, a small but sincere smile. "Be a good father to Emma, that's all that matters now." As Richard left, he felt a weight come off his shoulders. He knew the road would still be long, but for the first time he felt he was in the right place to start. After they returned from the cruise, Richard was waiting for Emma outside the school, as he did religiously every day. His commitment to his daughter had become a fixed point in his routine, an anchor that kept him focused. He didn't know if Evelyn realized how much it meant to him, but Emma certainly was beginning to. When he saw his daughter coming out of the gates, dragging her backpack and chatting animatedly with a friend, Richard waved. Emma smiled and ran to him, throwing herself into his arms. "Hi, Dad," she said, her face lighting up. "Hi, my angel. How was your first day back at school after your trip?" Emma hesitated for a moment, her smile fading slightly. "It was good, but there's something I wanted to tell you." Richard noticed the change in her tone and opened the car door for her. "All right, we can talk on the way." When they were in traffic, Emma began to speak, her voice hesitant. "Mom and Victor broke up." Richard was silent, surprised. He glanced at Emma through the rearview mirror, trying to gauge how she felt about it. "Really? And you're okay with that?" Emma shrugged, looking out of the window. "I guess so. Actually, I don't think he was as nice as he seemed at first." Richard gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to hide the satisfaction he felt at hearing this. "Why do you say that, Emma?" "Because on the cruise he was different," she explained. "At first he was fun, but then he started complaining about everything. He complained if I wanted to play in the pool a bit more, or if Mom wanted to spend more time with me. He seemed, I don't know, annoyed all the time." Richard felt his stomach turn. He thought of Victor, the man who had seemed so perfect in Emma and Evelyn's eyes, now revealing a face he had always feared. "And your mother, what did she think of that?" Emma was silent for a moment, thinking. "I think she was sad, but she said she doesn't want to be with someone who doesn't like me as I am. She said we should always listen to our instincts, and I think her instinct said it wasn't going to work out." Richard looked at his daughter through the rearview mirror again. "Your mother is very wise, Emma. And she's right. You deserve to be surrounded by people who love and respect you exactly as you are." Emma smiled, relaxing into the seat. "Yeah, I guess so." The rest of the drive was uneventful, but Richard's heart was churning. He wondered how Evelyn was feeling. He knew how much she valued Emma's happiness, but he also knew how hard it was to give up something or someone that seemed like a promise of happiness. Flashback to the cruise. At the beginning of the trip, everything seemed promising. Victor was charismatic and attentive, as he had always been. He helped Emma with the games on deck and made Evelyn laugh with his stories. But as the days went by, something began to change. Victor seemed irritable, impatient. If Emma insisted on staying a little longer in the pool or asked to watch the children's show, he would roll his eyes. "Again, Emma? Can't we do something more adult?" Evelyn watched everything, feeling uncomfortable. At first, she tried to justify Victor's behavior. Maybe he was tired. Maybe it was just the stress of being away from work. But as the days went by, his attitudes became more evident. One evening, while they were having dinner in the ship's restaurant, Emma excitedly began to tell him about her adventures at the kids' club. Victor interrupted her mid-sentence. "Emma, could you keep it down a bit? We're in a restaurant." Emma remained silent, her eyes fixed on her plate. Evelyn felt her blood boil but took a deep breath before speaking. "Victor, she's just excited. You don't have to talk like that." Victor raised his hands in surrender. All right. I'm just asking for a little reassurance." From that moment on, Evelyn became more attentive, and she realized something that bothered her deeply. Victor had no patience for motherhood. He liked Evelyn, but didn't seem willing to accept Emma as part of a complete package. On the last night of the cruise, while Emma slept in the cabin bedroom, Evelyn confronted Victor. "You're not the same person I knew," she said, crossing her arms. "Oh, Evelyn, you're exaggerating," he replied, exasperated. "It's just that sometimes it's hard to deal with children. I thought that maybe with Richard around now, you could share the responsibilities more." She remained silent, shocked by what she was hearing. Share the responsibilities? Victor, Emma is not an obligation. She's my daughter, and if you think her role in my life is negotiable, then I don't think we have anything more to discuss. Victor tried to argue, but Evelyn was determined. She knew that staying with someone who didn't accept her daughter unconditionally would be repeating the same mistakes of the past. Back to the present. The next day, while picking up Emma again, Richard felt a mixture of concern and admiration for Evelyn. He knew how difficult it must have been to make that decision, but he also knew that she would always put Emma first. Emma seemed more cheerful than the day before. When she got into the car, she started talking about her classes and her friends, and Richard noticed that she seemed calmer, as if a cloud had passed. "How's your mother?" he asked casually as he drove off. "She's fine," Emma replied. "Last night we made popcorn and watched a movie. She was laughing a lot." Richard smiled, relieved. "That's good. You know, your mother is an incredible woman. You're lucky to have her." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "I know, and I think she deserves someone who's really nice, like you're trying to be." Richard felt a tightness in his chest, but also a twinge of hope. He didn't know where this journey would take him, but he was determined to keep trying, not just for Emma, but for himself, and perhaps for the remnant of hope that one day Evelyn would also see the man he was trying to become, and he was going to do whatever he could to win Evelyn's love back. A few days later, the day was clear and serene when Richard arrived at the downtown bookstore where Evelyn usually spent her afternoons. He knew she would be there, concentrating on her reading or perhaps sketching out ideas for her next book. Over the last few months, he had been trying to rebuild their relationship, not as husband and wife, but as allies in Emma's upbringing. He didn't have unrealistic expectations. He knew that regaining Evelyn's trust would take time. Emma, however, had become the strongest link between them. School pick-up days and weekends together had become something natural. Richard finally understood how small actions could make a huge difference. He began to take pride in being present, in being by his daughter's side. And somehow this also helped him to see Evelyn in a way he never had before. When he entered the bookshop, he saw Evelyn sitting at a table near the window. She looked calm, with a cup of coffee beside her and a notebook open in front of her. There was a lightness in her posture that he hadn't seen for years. He took a deep breath before approaching. "I hope I'm not interrupting." he said, with a hesitant smile. Evelyn raised her eyes in surprise, but relaxed when she saw him. "Richard, no, it's all right. I'm just trying to organize some ideas for a new book." He sat down in front of her, uninvited, but she didn't seem to mind. "Maybe," she replied, closing her notebook. "It's still at the beginning, nothing too definite." Richard nodded, genuinely interested. "You know you have incredible talent, don't you? Your books are impressive." Evelyn arched an eyebrow, a little suspiciously. "You've told me that before, but it still seems strange to hear it from you." He laughed without humor. "I deserve it, I guess. In the past, I never gave you the importance you and your talent deserved. But I'm trying to change that now. And to be honest, I wanted to talk to you about something." Evelyn tilted her head, curious. "What would that be?" "I've been thinking," he paused, adjusting his tone. "What if we organized an exhibition for you at the next book biennial, something that celebrates your career, your books, your impact as a writer?" Evelyn blinked in surprise. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. I've already made some contacts and I know I can organize something special. I thought it would be a good way to show the world what you stand for and also to encourage you to write this new book." For a moment, Evelyn was silent, absorbing the idea. There was a mixture of incredulity and excitement on her face. "Richard," she finally spoke, her voice lower, "why are you doing this?" "Because you deserve it," he replied without hesitation. "Because for too long I've been blind to what you're capable of, and because I believe in you, Evelyn. I always have. I've just been too stupid to show it." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment, searching for some evidence of falsehood, but found nothing. For the first time, it seemed that Richard was being completely sincere. "I don't know what to say," she admitted with a shy smile. "Then say yes," he replied. "Let me do it for you." She hesitated for a few more seconds before nodding. "All right, but only if you promise not to overdo it." "I promise," he said, raising his hands in surrender. The following weeks were intense. Richard immersed himself in planning the exhibition, getting involved in details that he would previously have delegated to someone else. He chose photos that represented the most important moments in Evelyn's career, worked on partnerships with publishers, and even managed to get one of the biennial's biggest talks dedicated to her. Evelyn, for her part, felt divided. It was hard to ignore Richard's efforts, but at the same time, she was afraid to allow herself to trust him again. However, seeing his commitment, the way he devoted himself not only to the project but also to Emma, made her start to let her guard down. When the day of the biennial finally arrived, Evelyn was impressed by what she saw. The exhibition was elegant, carefully organized, and for the first time she felt that the space reflected who she was as a writer and as a woman. Richard stood next to Emma, watching her as she welcomed the first visitors and gave interviews to the press. He didn't want to steal the limelight, but at the same time he was proud to have been part of that moment. "She looks so happy," Emma said, tugging on her father's arm. "She deserves to be," Richard replied, smiling. After the exhibition ended, Evelyn found Richard and Emma in a corner of the biennial. She was visibly moved. "Thank you," she told him sincerely, "for everything. That was more than I could have imagined." "You don't have to thank me," he replied, even more sincerely. "I only did what I should have done a long time ago." Evelyn smiled, but there was something else in her eyes. "You know, Richard, I don't know exactly when it happened, but I've noticed that you've changed. And as hard as it was at first, I'm beginning to believe that this change is real." "It's real," he assured her. "I know I've hurt you and Emma a lot. I can't change the past, but I'm willing to spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it." Evelyn nodded, holding his gaze. "I believe you." In the months that followed, Richard, Evelyn and Emma's lives took an unexpected but natural turn. They started spending more time together, not just because of Emma, but because they began to rediscover what had brought them together in the beginning. Evelyn began working on her new book, encouraged by Richard's constant support. Not only did he read every draft she showed him, but he also made constructive suggestions and helped her look for inspiration. One evening, while they were at Evelyn's house, something that had become a regular occurrence, Richard prepared dinner while Emma helped her mother with the computer. It was a simple scene, but for everyone there, it represented something much greater: togetherness. When dinner was ready, everyone sat down at the table. Richard raised his glass of wine and looked at Evelyn and Emma. "I wanted to say something," he began a little nervously. "You two mean everything to me. I know it took me a while to realize it, but you saved me from myself. Thank you for giving me the chance to be a better man." Evelyn smiled, touching his hand. "We're a family, Richard, and that's what matters." Emma raised her glass of juice enthusiastically. "To our family." "To our family," Richard and Evelyn repeated in unison. At that moment, as they laughed and talked, they all knew that the past was finally where it should be, behind them. The future, bright and full of possibilities, was theirs to build together.